true love is winning the championship, and maybe this does happen for you.
I'm going to marry Devontae Freeman.
There it is, guys. You heard it here first. Nick Walsh, Devontae Freeman, they're getting married.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, where men of fantasy genius have realized, hey guys, we don't need real football skills to dominate on the fantasy field. Yeah. So slap on your pads and grab your helmet. Shit's about to get real.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host, Nick Schreck, and joining me tonight from the West Coast in sunny San Francisco, we have the one, the only, not Serial Man, but Nick Walsh himself. Walsh, what is up?
Nothing, Schreck. I appreciate that intro. I'm doing great. I'm ready to talk about some goddamn football. How are you doing is what I should ask there. That's the correct thing to ask.
I'm great, Walsh. I mean, I think I was even better when we came on precast and you filled me in on the wrestling extravaganza that you attended last week. And as everyone knows, we took 4th of July week off here at Let's Talk Fantasy Football to regroup and get ready for the season. Walsh, you celebrated by going to a wrestling emporium, I guess I'll call it. The show of a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a ton of fun. It was sort of an unintentional week off because Vinny and I were supposed to get a podcast in, this exact podcast that we're recording today. But you know what? We're real people, and sometimes things happen. Like Vinny has family members get engaged, and I get too fucked up and yell too much at a wrestling show and don't have a voice. So, you know, both, I think, equally reasonable and responsible excuses for this being delayed to its current moment.
Without question. Don and I were out traveling across the globe, and we're unsure if Rodgers is still alive or not. But at least for the four of us, that's where we stand now, Walshy. But we're excited. We're talking NFC South, and in part one, we're talking the Atlanta Falcons and the Carolina Panthers. Lots of big names, lots of potential fantasy production as we'll kind of dive into here. We'll hit part one. Obviously, part two, we'll be talking New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which you guys will be able to tune into Friday morning after you listen here to part one. And then Walsh, from there, we're moving on to the NFC North. Big division, lots of big names, and I think the fantasy podcast is just going to keep coming. It's season. It's time for us to rock and roll.
Hell yeah, baby. Let's get right into it.
Let's do it. Let's start with the Atlanta Falcons, Walsh, and let's start at the top as we always do at the QB position. Matty Ice coming off the board, QB number 6, second pick in the 7th round. I'll reiterate for everybody out there, our ADPs come from Fantasy Football Calculator. And here at Let's Talk Fantasy Football, we are big believers in a late QB draft strategy. So just keep that in mind. We'll obviously talk in general, but we tend to wait on QB. So our ADPs in our leagues do change a little bit. Walsh, Matt Ryan actually had the best fantasy season of his career last year on his way to a QB2 finish. Probably got a little less recognition than he normally does, with Patrick Mahomes doing his thing, being the star of my Chiefs and my heart, out there doing his thing. He played really, really well. And I think, you get Dirk Koetter returning for a second stint as the team's offensive coordinator. Julio Jones, obviously a stud. We're going to talk about Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu. They lose Tevin Coleman. So lots of pieces in the passing game. But I think Matt Ryan, once again, top 10 QB, who I think often gets overlooked.
Yeah, Ryan was great last year. He did really, really well. I do think there's reason to be a little bit cautious on him. As you said, we don't really draft quarterbacks too much in this sort of range. Quarterback 6 is not normally the quarterback that I am taking in a draft. That being said, last year, Matt Ryan outperformed his career averages in touchdown percentage, adjusted yards per attempt, and quarterback rating. So I think it's reasonable to expect a little bit of regression back towards his sort of career norm in terms of his efficiency, his touchdowns, that sort of thing. I also think it's fair to expect a lot more running on the Falcons this year.
Yes.
That they were kind of forced into throwing the ball a lot last year due to some injuries on the defense and then the way Steve Sarkisian was playing it. But as you mentioned, Dirk Koetter's back. He's the new offensive coordinator. And based on his preferences as a play caller, as well as Dan Quinn's preference for running the ball, Dan Quinn being the head coach, I would think that they're going to be throwing the ball downfield a lot less. They're going to be trying to establish the run as some teams like to do. And with the defense, hopefully healthy and being better, especially over the middle of the field, it would make sense that they don't need to throw the ball as much. So to me, by drafting Matt Ryan at ADP, you're sort of banking on him maintaining his efficiency, which was a bit of a career outlier for him in an offense that's very likely to throw the ball less times.
Yep. Fair enough, Walshy. I mean, again, like you said, we usually we talk about QBs that are going QB 13 on average, QB 14 as we pick through those later rounds and kind of look at the guys that slide, especially you. You like to stream the Eli Mannings of the world one week and make it work. You always find a way, unfortunately for us. But you talk about running the ball a lot, and that obviously brings us to Devontae Freeman. They lose Tevin Coleman. He goes to San Francisco. Freeman comes back as the undisputed starter, assuming he can stay healthy here in this offense. The Falcons went and invested a first-round pick at right guard and right tackle, so they do boost the line there for him. He's had knee, foot, groin injuries, surgeries. I mean, you name it. He's missed a shit ton of games. He's played one full season in the past 4, so on the injury side, concerning. Consistently injured. But from 2015 to 2017, he had 35 touchdowns in 45 games. That was with Tevin Coleman scoring 20 touchdowns as well. I think Devontae Freeman, who's running back 17, 8th pick in the 3rd round right now, I think he's priced about right. I actually kind of like him there. I think he's a running back 2, and I think assuming health, he stays right there. He can sit down at that bottom side of running back 2, and I'm okay there if he's my second running back coming out of the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you nailed it on the head. You're obviously banking on health, which is a tough thing to bank on with Devontae Freeman. But his best career season was in 2015 under Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator. Dirk Koetter and Dan Quinn have described their offensive style this year as Shanahan-esque. So it seems reasonable. Like you said, they improved the offensive line. It seems reasonable that he could be pretty efficient if he stays healthy. And if he is healthy, he's likely to get somewhere around 200 carries. I would guess about 60 targets, and conservatively speaking, 50% of the red zone work for the running backs. Yep. So, I mean, I think you can project him for over 1,000 yards rushing, probably 500 yards receiving, and like 6 to 12 touchdowns, which is a pretty damn good season.
Yeah, you're pumped. You're pumped if that's how it turns out.
Yeah. And again, maybe he gets hurt and it doesn't work out, but at that draft position, I think he's a reasonable enough risk because of that upside that we both talked about.
Well, you can't find true love if you don't take a chance you're going to get hurt, and true love is winning the championship. And maybe this does happen for you.
I'm going to marry Devontae Freeman.
There it is, guys. You heard it here first. Nick Walsh, Devontae Freeman. They're getting married. They're doing some stuff together. So good for you guys. Congratulations. And we drink to that, Walshy. So, but God forbid something goes on here with Devontae Freeman, and not even goes on with Devontae Freeman. Those touches also have to go somewhere, right? We watched Tevin Coleman have a role, even with Devontae Freeman being dominant. And, here you've got Ito Smith, Kenyon Barner, Brian Hill, Quadri Olson. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. Is it Olson, 5th round pick out of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, exactly. I think we can kind of safely knock the latter 3 off to the side, unless there's an injury to Freeman or Smith. Yep. But yes.
And then it's Ito Smith, running back 47, coming off the board, 8th pick in the 10th round. Do you expect him to fill that similar gap to what we saw with Tevin Coleman there?
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, they were using him last year even before Devontae Freeman went down. So at times they were, giving him maybe 10% of the running back work. And then when Tevin Coleman was the starter, Ito Smith was coming in and getting a decent amount of work. I mean, he led the team in red zone carries last year. He had fewer inside the 10 and 5 than Tevin Coleman, but still that's a big deal. And I would expect Ito Smith, who, wasn't terribly efficient, wasn't really like a show stealer or anything like that, but I would expect him to take over sort of the familiar Tevin Coleman role. And by that, I mean an emergency flex with the upside to be an RB2 in some weeks or due to injury.
Well, opportunity knocks, especially like you said, with them throwing a little bit less, going to the ground there, and opportunity is there for Ito Smith. So I think we got to go to the passing game, Walsh, because that's kind of where we know they've got some studs, but we're also seeing an opportunity for decline a little bit. Julio Jones, Walsh, obviously a stud, wide receiver number 4 right now in ADP, coming off the board, 11th pick in the first round. Unquestionably, we talked on past podcasts about how we ranked some guys and these top wide receivers coming off the board. He's a stud. I don't really think we have to spend a ton of time on Julio Jones. Under Dirk Koetter previously, he had 10 touchdowns in 2012, 40 red zone targets in 36 games, whatever. He was a stud. I expect him to stay a stud. We all get hung up on the touchdown issue with Julio Jones, but the volume is still going to be there for him.
Yeah, and what you said there is pretty encouraging that he did have 10 touchdowns that one year with Dirk Koetter, because that's been the issue with him these past couple of years is they just can't seem to use him in the red zone. And last year in general, the Falcons were just egregiously bad in the red zone would be, I think, a nice way to put it. But with Julio, if he's being used effectively in the red zone, you would think his ceiling is, the fucking moon at this point. He hasn't been lower than PPR wide receiver 7 over the last 5 years.
Crazy.
And that PPR wide receiver 7 finish was in a season where he only caught 3 touchdowns. So you don't have to worry about Julio. Draft him. I mean, you can split hairs among the top wide receivers. I'm not going to knock you for taking Julio anywhere, really.
No, I don't think you can. Like you said, you're making splitting hairs. Make your pick. Like you said, if wide receiver 7 is where he finishes and he does catch 3 touchdowns, whatever, you're still fine. He's not the reason you won or lost your season if you did lose it. So as safe as a pick as it comes, especially under Dirk Koetter, expect big things. I think Walsh, as you and I and everybody else knows now with the Falcons, the bigger question becomes who are the wide receiver options the rest of the way? Mohamed Sanu, Justin Hardy, Calvin Ridley. And we'll get to tight end with Austin Hooper, Hoop Daddy. But let's stay in the wide receiver category. Who here is Calvin Ridley your next wide receiving option in the step chart?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got to be. Last year, Mohamed Sanu was primarily in the slot. He got about 75% of his snaps in the slot. So I would think Ridley will be the other guy outside, barring anything weird happening. He's currently going 12th pick in the 4th round. That's wide receiver 20. That's pretty rich for him. Yeah. And just for some perspective, though, he was PPR wide receiver 22 last year. I think Ridley in general is one of the weirdest guys to project or maybe the toughest guys to project in the NFL, particularly at the receiver position, just because last year he had a 15.6% touchdown rate. For perspective, most guys hit like 4 to 6%. It's just like not a sustainable thing. Last year he had 64 catches, 10 of them were touchdowns. So obviously, we expect that to regress. We don't expect a 15% touchdown rate from Calvin Ridley this year. That being said, those 64 catches could turn into 80 or 85 catches, like no problem. He's not running like the deepest routes in the world. He only had 92 targets last year. If he sees 110 targets or 115 targets, he could absolutely be wide receiver 20. But then again, we think they're going to pass less. It's a really, really confusing thing to me. And then just to throw even more confusion in, last year he was extremely volatile. He had a very high ceiling and a very low floor. So how much do you want to invest in a guy who you can't really project his floor all that well?
I agree, and that was my next point, Walsh, because I think you've set it up, the narrative perfectly, is, after a 3-game stretch in September there for Ridley, he had 6 touchdowns. His season-long pace was 65 catches for 743 and 5 touchdowns. The rest of the way. So like you said, very volatile. And in that short stretch, he was fucking killer. You loved it. But outside of that, the unpredictability, everyone forgets, especially now when we're talking preseason stuff, they look at the big picture. He scored whatever it was, the 10 touchdowns. Like, they don't look at the fact that he scored 6 in 3 weeks or whatever it was. It's easy to look at the big number and think it's sexy. And there's way more volatility to it. And yeah, I agree. Wide receiver 20 is going to be a little rich, particularly with the fact that we think the passing game comes down a little bit. And your love, Devontae Freeman, gets the rock.
Yeah, it's looking at the other people generally going in that area, you've got Chris Godwin, who we'll get to on part 2, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, Jarvis Landry. Like, these are all people going behind Calvin Ridley. I'm not so sure I would be taking Calvin Ridley ahead of Tyler Lockett or Cooper Kupp or Chris Godwin. I don't think he's egregiously mispriced, but I'm not sure I like him just as high as he seems to be going.
That's all right. That's why we all draft our teams. But I'm with you. Probably wouldn't be my pick with those other guys on the board. And we're not interested in Justin Hardy at this point, I would say, since we can't even talk about Calvin Ridley confidently.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, the other guy there is Sanu, who was he's going undrafted, but he was PPR wide receiver 31 last year. Not a bad season, really had very similar stats to Ridley, except he had 4 touchdowns compared to Ridley's 10. So there you go. That's the difference.
Yep.
Yards wise, he actually had 17 more yards on the season and 2 more catches than Ridley. That being said, I think his targets are likely to diminish as Ridley sort of takes a bigger role in the offense. And they reportedly tried to shop him a little bit this offseason. So it doesn't seem like they're that concerned with having him there and featuring him. I think they may also look to play more 2 tight end personnel, just because they did kind of bring in a couple of guys who are decent blockers behind Austin Hooper, who we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk Hoop Daddy, Walsh. Austin Hooper goes out there. He was what, 71, 660, and 4 last year. So he finished tight end number 6 on the season. It was I feel like almost the case of Julio Jones complaint of, touchdowns. He had 4 grabs or 4 or more catches, in 9 games. So consistent kind of with the touch there. I do like that Dirk Koetter helped Cameron Brate score 20 touchdowns over the past 3 years in Tampa Bay. Obviously, we've talked about the Matt Ryan effect of slowing down on the receptions, but he comes off the board tight end 11, 8th pick in the 10th round. I'm fine if you believe in Austin Hooper and you want him to be your tight end.
Yeah, to me, that's extreme value. And I mean, to anyone who's listened to us in past years, it shouldn't be a surprise that I am about Hoop Daddy at this point. Yep. But I mean, we'll talk about some other guys later who are going, ahead of him and that sort of thing. I think Hooper's just as good, if not a better target than some of those guys. His usage and snap count decreased down the stretch, but he was also battling injuries. And the fact that they brought in Luke Stalker and Logan Paulson, particularly Paulson, who is more of a blocking specialist, the fact that they brought those guys in kind of signals to me that maybe they're looking to use him in more creative ways. You bring in a guy who's a blocking specialist to allow Hooper to be that sort of move tight end, that F tight end, who you move around the formation, you feature in different ways, you get him in matchups that you like. And a guy who got 88 targets last year, in a year that he was only playing about 50 to 60% of snaps for the second half of the season due to injuries, I'm pretty about it. It seems to me that he's, he was kind of like a fashionable name, I guess, in some circles last year. Yeah. And I think the league's the fantasy community has moved on from him, and I'm not sure that we should have yet.
All right. You're loving you some Falcons here, Walshy. All right. I see you, Freeman and Hoop Daddy. Nice combo. Walshy in the middle. Nice little sandwich. I love it. That should get people going. That's a sandwich I'm into. And I think that's really it, though, on the Falcons. Well, it's like you said, the other tight ends come in. They're blocking tight ends, not fantasy relevant here on the Falcons.
Yeah, I think that should do it. They should be a fun team to watch this year. I'm pretty pumped.
There we go. Let's score those fantasy points. Julio Jones, bless up. I know you didn't get as much love from Walshy, but we believe in you. So you're going to be just fine.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, home of the brutally honest fantasy advice you've always needed.
And Walsh, let's move on. Let's talk Carolina Panthers for the second half of the Part 1 preview. And we'll kick off right at the top, as we always do, with quarterback Cam Newton coming off the board at QB 11, 8th pick, in the 9th round. I'm honestly kind of split here on what I want to believe on Cam Newton. So I'm going to toss the ball into your court and kind of get some thoughts, because part of me wants to be concerned. I know they say he's healthy and he's not going to miss any time in camp, and but I'm concerned about the arm. And then part of me wants to believe that he's going to be just fine, and that we'll start to see the Cam Newton of old, or at least throw the ball more, but not. He's not going to rush for 7 or 8 touchdowns anymore. I think that's who he was rather than who he is now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. Cam Newton, for the majority of his career, has been this guy who's chucking the ball downfield to these big wide receivers who suck but are gigantic, and running the ball a ton, particularly in the red zone, which is why he got so much fantasy value. So last year, what the Panthers did was they threw the ball a lot more on early downs, but they were short throws. A lot of Christian McCaffrey, a lot of DJ Moore in short throws, like that sort of thing. So Newton's average depth of target has gone way down. He was really inefficient throwing the ball deep last year, which I don't know if that was the injury or what, and we'll see whether that comes back. It might just be, the skill sets of the guys around him too, but that didn't really work. And then also he was running the ball way less. I mean, he had 16 red zone carries last year compared to 28 the year before. So it seems like Norv Turner and that offensive scheme is putting him in positions to succeed easier, with less stress, with less in less dramatic fashion, I guess.
Which for Cam, it was less sexy. He's not a fan of it, but for the team, it's better.
Yeah, exactly. You've got this guy who's gone through some injuries and that sort of thing. He's getting a bit older, and you're letting him just kind of throw the ball to playmakers short and let them make plays, which I don't think is a bad strategy at all. And I think it makes a lot of sense for him. That being said, it does it's Josh Allen has the same sort of fantasy value that Cam used to have, where just chuck it deep and run, right?
Yep.
Like Cam does not have that Josh Allen fantasy value anymore. So I wonder, we keep talking about upside and that sort of thing. I don't know if Cam has the upside to be QB1 this year, which is the first time in his career that you can really say that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a bad draft pick at quarterback 11. I'm not sure that it's one that I'm necessarily targeting, because I think there is upside in other places, maybe more so than Cam and this short offense.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it with the the upside part of it, Walsh. I mean, I think for somebody who, I don't even want to call him safe, but I think if you're a guy who is drafting, you're not going to pay up, but you're taking a QB who, look, I think Cam's going to be fine, but like you said, he's not going to have the upside, I think, of going boom for you as some of the other guys are. So if you're a guy who's just like, I'm going to draft a QB who's going to be fine, get me my shit, and I don't want to play around with it, Cam's okay at 11. I know you like Rosen. We've talked about a couple guys. We're going to talk about Jameis. I know he usually gets you giddy, and some other guys, but I think he'll end up being fine. I just don't think he's going to be the sexy upside, like you said.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I do want to mention that they drafted Will Grier in the 3rd round. I fucking love Will Grier. So if Cam goes down hurt, no more Taylor Heineke this year. It will be Will Grier slinging the pig. Will Grier loves slinging pig. We'll see what happens if that does happen. I love watching him play football.
I'll tell you what, Walsh, I'm sensing a lot of love for the NFC South coming out of you. And we're literally only 1.5, not even maybe 1.25 teams in. So I'm sensing a lot of love for guys, even if they're not the sexy stars right now. So Grier, keep your eyes peeled. Walsh is coming for you. Walsh, Christian McCaffrey at running back, stud. And he's going to continue to carry the rock there in Carolina. Currently running back 3, 3rd pick in the 1st round. At the top of the draft there, it's kind of pick your guys. I still think, Saquon is probably Saquon is the argument up top at 1, but McCaffrey coming off at 3 is splitting hairs.
Yeah, I mean, he's off at 3. I think you can make a definite argument for McCaffrey to be the number 1 pick in the draft. I mean, last year he was on the field almost every play, it seemed like, until very late in the season. And I think he's got a legitimate shot at a 1,000-yard rushing and 1,000-yard receiving season. I think there's a couple guys who do this year, but McCaffrey, I think, might have the best shot. I mean, he led the team in targets as a running back with 124 targets. I know we expect DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel to take steps forward this year, but I'd be surprised if Christian McCaffrey doesn't lead the team in targets again. So it's to me, you can't go wrong picking him at any point that he's available in the draft.
Yep, 100%. Nailed it. Christian McCaffrey, welcome home. Let's talk wide receivers. You threw out DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel as we're talking kind of about their step forward and their progression kind of in this offense, so to speak. We'll start with DJ Moore, Walsh, wide receiver 26 coming off the board, 12th pick in the 5th round. He earned significant snaps kind of starting in week 8, averaged just over 6 targets a game with Newton under center through week 15. you assume he's going to draw some tougher coverage, I think, than Curtis Samuel this year, but he has some great after the catch ability. He managed 14.3 yards per reception last year, which quite frankly, I mean, he didn't find the end zone a ton, but if he can get in the end zone and continue to do it with Cam, if Cam is truly healthy, as they say his arm is, I think the sky's the limit here for DJ Moore.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that, 14 and some odd yards per reception. Yep. His average depth of target was only, I believe, about 9.4 yards down the field. So this is a guy who is just incredible at getting yards after the catch. And that's how they seem to use him. They like getting him the ball in space, close to the line of scrimmage and kind of letting him use his, natural abilities. And I say natural, that makes it seem like he didn't work for him. His worked for abilities. I don't know. Whatever. Nature versus nurture question right now. We're going to get real philosophical, but no, I think the question is really, where's DJ Moore going to line up? And you can ask this with Curtis Samuel as well as the rest of the wide receivers, because DJ Moore saw 32% of his snaps in the slot last year. I'm interested to see if he spends more time there this year. I think the barrier to that is Jarius Wright, who, was their primary slot receiver.
Yep.
But I think it's valid to ask whether or not Jarius Wright will be on the field, because you've got Chris Hogan, you've got Torrey Smith, and then obviously you have Moore and Samuel who will be out there. So if you've got Wright out there with Samuel and Moore, Wright's in the slot. But if you've got Hogan or Smith out there, then you can put DJ Moore in the slot or Curtis Samuel in the slot. So I'm really interested to see where guys are lining up in the preseason, because I think DJ Moore, if we can project that he's going to get, say, 60% of his snaps in the slot, like, sign me the fuck up, because they're going to get him the ball super easy. They're going to get him the ball in space to really make plays, and I'm really all about that. But if he's going to be primarily an outside receiver, I have some worries.
Okay, so if Jarius Wright stays more in the slot, you're a little bit concerned on DJ Moore.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, Jarius Wright can get the fuck off the field because he's not worth shit in fantasy. I'm sorry, Jarius Wright, you're probably a great person. But maybe not. Maybe you're a shitty person. I don't know. The point is, I don't know what I'm talking about, but in terms of Jarius Wright as a person, but Jarius Wright does not need to be in the slot on this team. Put Chris Hogan or Torrey Smith on the outside. Let DJ Moore just eat in the middle of the field, please.
All right, we will see if DJ Moore is going to feast Jarius Wright. So sorry. Curtis Samuel, Walsh, wide receiver 48 coming off the board, 11th pick in the 10th round. We watched him play pretty much a full complement of snaps, weeks 12 through 17, 42 targets, 22 receptions, 315 yards and 2 scores. I think the ROI on him kind of going here at wide receiver 48 here, 11th pick in the 10th round. We talk about taking dart throws on guys all the time, right? When we get to these lower ends, I think the possible return here on Curtis Samuel for what you're going to pay is incredible. I think if things pan out, particularly if you believe Cam's arm is healthy. So I like him at his price here. I won't say he's practically free, but he's pretty cheap for what I think the upside on him is.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can make the argument, these are both young wide receivers. We don't know how they're going to be used. We just talked about that. If you told me Curtis Samuel finishes this year as a better fantasy wide receiver than DJ Moore, I would be like, yeah, that's not terribly surprising. I would bet the other side of that, but I don't think it's out of the question at all. So at this point, with Curtis Samuel's price, he's the guy I'm targeting on the Panthers wide receivers. I'm not going after DJ Moore at the end of the 5th. I'm looking for Curtis Samuel at the end of the 10th.
Yeah, and just to kind of support that even more, Walsh, in the final 6 games, he posted double-digit PPR points 5 times, despite only scoring 2 touchdowns. So that's obviously, whether he gets the touchdowns or not, obviously a lot of red zone options, but he's already shown that he can produce for you. Hey, double-digit PPR points out of almost an 11th round pick. Sign me the fuck up. I'm there with you.
Yeah, 100%.
We talked, obviously, Jarius Wright's a big no-go for you, so we're going to move past him. A lot of hateful things already said. So Chris Hogan, Torrey Smith, more important for the team than for fantasy purposes right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope one of those guys is out there just running go routes on every play to kind of take the top off the defense and let DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and Christian McCaffrey operate in space, but not useful for our purposes.
All right, good for the Panthers, not good for us. And let's talk about the tight end position. Greg Olsen obviously suffers the season-ending foot injury, banged up. Tight end 14 coming off the board, 6th pick in the 13th round. And then you got Ian Thomas. December, he ranked as the tight end 6 over the final 5 weeks. I don't know that I'm drafting Thomas, but I'm not drafting Greg Olsen. I think the upside is with Ian Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely. Like 110%. Ed's question of the week, just to answer this as we go through was, are you okay leaving the draft with Greg Olsen as your tight end? And my answer is fuck no. Like absolutely not. Greg Olsen is 34 years old and has had 3 major foot injuries since the start of the 2017 season. That's 3 major foot injuries in 2 seasons. Over that time period, he's played 16 games total, and in those 16 games, he's managed 44 catches for 482 yards and 5 touchdowns. I'm not touching Greg Olsen with a, what did they say in the Grinch song, 39 and a half foot pole? Is that what he says?
It sounds good enough to me.
All right. Yeah, I'm not touching Greg Olsen with a 39 and a half foot pole.
There, lock it down, guys. That is it on the tight end spot. Ian Thomas, is he a guy you're willing to draft at the back end, or are you going to wait and see how that offense plays out?
No, I'm going to wait and see, but I do like him. As you said, he produced a bit down the stretch, and he's entering his 2nd season. He's a big athletic dude. I think if Olsen is off the field for any sort of reason, Thomas becomes an intriguing guy.
Love it. I think you're spot on. And also be interesting to see Thomas there, even with Greg Olsen, if he can get across the middle a little bit. If, Torrey Smith or Chris Hogan can, as you said, blow the top off the defense a little bit to open up some opportunities. Maybe we'll see some fireworks if Cam's shoulder is truly healthy. But Walsh, I think that kind of wraps us up on the Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons. Is there anything else you have on these 2 teams before we shut it down and get ready for part 2 of the NFC South?
No, man, I think we covered it. If you guys do have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, via any sort of method that you deem fit. But I think we covered it for now, man.
I love it, guys. Yeah, definitely Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, the whole thing. We're currently having an issue with forms on the site, so we are not getting those submissions right now. So tweet us, Instagram us. If you want to send an email question, info@letstalkfantasyfootball.com. Your questions will get to us, and we'll use them on the podcast. We'll reply directly to you and make sure you get an answer. So subscribe, sign up. You know the freaking drill. And I am Nick Schreck for Let's Talk Fantasy Football. He is Nick Walsh. We'll be back with part 2 of the NFC South shortly. We will catch you on the flip side.
This has been Let's Talk Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening.